So welcome to Upgrade Yourself Live, produced by Somerset House, which is to unpack and look into alternative career paths in the industry with amazing leaders in their field. And today I'm not joined by just one guest, but two amazing guests. I'm joined with designer, illustrator, radical creative, Charles Jeffrey, and amazing hairstylist, Claire Moore. Can we have a round of applause for them? Thank you so much both for being here today. How are you feeling?
Good.
I'm excited.
Yeah, really cute vibe in here.
Yeah,
Nice
fun.
vibes, love it.
Again, thank you so much for being here. You both look incredible. And before we get started, could you both actually do a short introduction to who you are and how you did get into the creative industry?
Yeah, sure. So I started my journey into the creative industry from education. So I started Central St Martin's when I was 18 years old. So I was at foundation there, and I decided to do the fashion pathway. And then I got into the BA of fashion design with marketing at Central St Martin's as well. So that was a 4-year course. And that has an internship year in it. So I did my internship at, believe it or not, Jack Wills, which is quite surprising. I used to work in the shop there, and basically the manager kind of said to me, she was like, oh, you know, there's an internship that you could do for, your internship year, and it's actually paid really well. And I actually had got offered an internship at Christian Dior previously to that, and I was really nervous about not being able to afford it because my family don't come from any money, and I was like didn't have any savings, so I was really unsure about like how to do it. So then I did this internship there for 6 months, saved loads of money, did my internship at Dior for 4 months, and then worked for a couple of other London designers. So I kind of gained a lot of sort of experience from that. Did my final year and then got onto the master's course. So around that time, I started this club night, which is the name of my brand, which is Loverboy. And it was just this kind of like silly little project that I was doing on the side. It was like a place for me and my friends to kind of get together. So when I graduated, I kind of had my my collection, but then I also had this like body of work that had from my club night. So I had like all of these images, all of these set design projects, like contacts that we were making music, we were doing kind of like, films. And then Lulu Kennedy from Fashion East sort of like, I guess when she visits the MA and looks at everybody's work in their portfolios, sort of saw this world. She saw like the work, but then she saw like a community, and she offered me a position on Fashion East. And I actually said no to it at the beginning because I was like completely like, I don't want to do fashion anymore. Like it's like so stressful. I don't have any money. Like this is so much. Like I can't do this. Just want to like do my club night. And then I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then she was like, okay, like kind of very like shocked. 2 weeks later, I get a message. And she basically offered me it again. She was like, just do your club night. Like, why don't you just do your club night at Fashion Week and then we can talk. So I did that. And then the kind of that famous thing of saying the rest is history, like it kind of got onto building it out as an actual, like, brand, Charles Jeffrey Loverboy. And we've done, I think, 15 collections now. We are in 90 stores worldwide. I have 2 studios in Somerset House. I've got 10 members of staff, and things are good.
I was just a classic art school dropout story, basically. Like, I wanted to be an artist and went to art college, and then I was just like, I hate this, like, and I just didn't enjoy it. But I was always interested in hair and makeup, but I always just thought of myself as a creative. But I don't think I realised that the two worlds could come together. So then I was like, I said to my mum, oh, I'm just going to go and do this like fashion makeup course. And it was like 1 day a week. And my mum was like, you cannot just do 1 day a week in college. Like, that's ridiculous. So then I was like, okay, well, I'll go to hairdressing college then. And then I did. And then I did an apprenticeship. And then at the end of it, I think I literally woke up one day and Googled like art, fashion, hair and makeup. And then London College Fashion came up. And then I just applied for it. I'd never even been to London before. I remember like the first year I was like, oh, if I don't get to like go backstage at Fashion Week, like next year, like I'm moving home, like. And then the next year, I had some really great mentors actually, and then one of them was like, oh, you should reach out to this agency and blah blah blah. And then I did, and then I got on a team, basically a fashion week. And it's funny because I don't even think I've said this before, but actually I remember like your shows happening like in the show space, and me going to like a different show and thinking, oh, that's so cool. Like I wish I was on, like I wish I was doing the hair backstage at Charles's show.
Oh,
like yeah, and
that's
then
so funny.
I remember it so clearly, like literally like thinking, oh, I wish I was doing that instead of like whatever, like the designer I was doing, like probably a boring one. And then I just was on like show teams and then like learned through that basically, and then eventually I started like meeting people and doing my own thing and shooting, and then it just kind of went from there really.
So this Upgrade Yourself Live is all about getting tangible advice for people who want to get into the creative industry. And I think I just want to mention now, because both of you in your stories mentioned doing a degree and going to university. What are your thoughts on kind of getting into the industry through a university degree or other methods? What would your advice be?
I think it depends, to be honest, because I think for me there's absolute, like coming from Liverpool, I think there was no way that I ever, like I didn't know anyone that worked in fashion. I didn't even know it was a job really. Like I think like me and my friends, we were always arty and making our own clothes and things like that. So it just didn't seem like it was like real, like to go further with it. Like it just seemed like it was a fun thing that we would do. So I think, to be honest, I can't imagine there would ever be a day where I would have went, Mum, I'm moving to London and I'm going to be a session hairdresser, because I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't have any money and I wouldn't have even known where to start. So I think for me, to be honest, with university, it was probably more like a ticket to London and a ticket into the industry.
Yeah, I think the landscape has really changed, especially under this current government. And I mean, I don't really want to get into it too much, but like the fact that like tuition fees are so high right now. You know, I have a lot of people that come to me and ask advice, and you know, like I still teach on the side. I find that something really important to do. I think that there's like many different routes about getting into the creative industry, especially within fashion. Because fashion is like it's got so many different elements to it, and I think that you can gain experience in one place and then apply it to another place. And I think it's also like, if you have a passion for it and you have an interest for it, there's so much information that's available about fashion right now, more than ever before, more than even when I was like, you know, a student. And I think that, you know, yes, getting into higher education can give you a foot in the door, and being part of a certain university gives you a foot in the door. But realistically, you know, if you can come out of somewhere with a skill, so you can learn a skill by doing an apprenticeship, you can learn a skill by, you know, self-teaching yourself. You know, if you're wanting to be a designer, you can learn how to pattern cut, you can learn how to make things. And, you know, putting yourself out there, like applying to small businesses, making a portfolio, reaching out to people, you can learn certain skills. The issues, though, is that, you know, there isn't government grants for people to do apprenticeships. And, you know, with a lot of small businesses, even like mine, we pay our interns now, thank God, we're able to. But, you know, a lot of my peers who maybe don't have a bigger business as mine, they're not able to pay, and, you know, you can't. So then they can only take, and it's legal, you can only take interns that are able to be certain, I think when you're in your actual internship year. But there is bigger businesses that have grants and they have loans, and I think there's things that you can sort of apply and put yourself like in front of. But I mean, that's more towards the design side of things. I think like going into editorial, you can definitely, you know, meet people, like work and do, help out with certain things, put yourself out there, you know, go to different magazines and see if there's any apprenticeships going or different jobs. Or even just now, like I think we live in a day and age where people are able to express themselves online. You know, there's so many platforms where you can build yourself up. Like TikTok is such a democratic platform. Like you can do something and really stick to it and build yourself up.
Charles, we definitely have to speak about your brand, Charles Jeffrey Loverboy, which celebrates queerness in London and also part of Scotland's historic culture, which I love as well. Could you just speak about, with your brand specifically, how you find inspiration, especially because it's such a changing brand and there's so many new ideas that come into fruition?
Thank you. Well, I think for me, like the research stage is like the most like fun stage. You know, it's like a complete fresh start. When I'm teaching at university, I like to say to my students, you know, you should just think about what you naturally gravitate towards. Like, what is it that you really like to go and see? What is it that you do mindlessly? Like, what do you like? Who do you like to look at? And kind of start from there. Always try and find like, you know, libraries or bookshops that do art books or fashion books, or go to like museum bookstores and just like sit and look at some things, find out, like write like artists' names down, like, you know, consume lots of stuff. And then I think it's important to also make your own primary research. So like, you know, if you're, you know, gravitating towards doodling or drawing all of the time, just sit and like actually like do lots of different artworks and drawings, and then use that as your primary research among your secondary research. Or, you know, if you're into photography or self-styling yourself, which is what I did for my process in my MA, like I was, you know, doing all of these illustrations, but then I was dressing in a different way. So my tutor was like, you should just take photos of yourself, like straight ups, like showing how you tied your belt and how you put your jacket on, you know, like that's primary research. So I think it's, when I'm doing collections, I like to kind of think about what I have now as a sort of infrastructure with Loverboy, like all of the different products that we have, like what sales are telling me is doing really well. And it's really good to see, like, you know, loads of people wearing our stuff and like actually like, okay, well, let's cater to them. We have our customer, but then I really want to pivot Loverboy into, you know, a new space. So I'm really interested in the idea of like queer wellness, for example. That's why I'm wearing my like leggings today and my trainers. But you know, like we were known for being a club kid brand. You know, like we had our club night. It was all about kind of like hedonism and partying and makeup and da da da. And like I still love all of those things. You know, it's a huge part of who I am. But then I'm growing up and I'm growing older, and there's other interests that me and my friends have. And I think it's also really important to look after your own body and to, you know, also find there's a disparity in sort of safe spaces for queer people to, you know, exercise, or, you know, like gyms have a very kind of toxic space, you know, for example. And then for me, I'm like, why doesn't Loverboy start doing more things that are aligned with kind of fitness or looking after your body or like health or something? So like I have this kind of responsibility to start a new conversation with my, you know, customers and with my followers, and that has to come from me as a person. So like, you know, some of my research is just actually becoming a bit more healthier as well. So like it's kind of, it comes from all of these different places.
You're saying taking inspiration from what you're drawn to, and this is what you're drawn to.
I'm drawn to, yeah.
So then that's what you're going to project, and then that's going to be believable and real, and that's why
it has to be
people
authentic.
are going to love it.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be authentic. And even like when we're doing research together for the hair, you know, it's like there could be something that like is completely random. Like, you know, there'll be some really funny, hilarious image of, you know, a Louis XIV kind of like illustration of like a huge volume of a hair, and then there'll be something that we both like together that's like some sort of like 80s Lego head. Yeah, there was like some plastic hair or something, like Amy Winehouse plus alien. Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of, it has to be authentic. It has to be something you naturally gravitate towards, and researching should never be painful. It should always be something that you're really drawn to and you want to read more about. Like I did all this research into the King Charles II, and I realised I never actually did any research onto him, but I was like, oh, this is really interesting. But yeah, I don't know, I kind of answered it in a really weird way. But
Yeah, no, definitely answered the question. Actually goes to my next question with Claire, because you've actually obviously worked with Charles, worked with the brand, and I wanted to ask the importance of relationships in the creative industry, and especially because you're a hairstylist, how do you make sure that you're both getting the desired outcome that you want and keeping that communication solid?
If it's actually why I want to be there and what I want to do, and like sometimes I've actually had people like message, like email me about jobs, and they're like, oh, can you send like more like, you know, normal or like hair or something a bit more commercial. But I'm like, well, you know, that's what I'm putting out there, and that's what I'm interested in. So if it's probably not, I'm probably not the right person for the job. And I think so it's like, it's knowing yourself, knowing what like your brand is and what you want to put out there, and then you're naturally going to be drawn to people that have similar, like it's like I bleached your hair and then we had a conversation and realised we loved each other, and then I think it came round and cut it, and then we had a glass of wine.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then, right? And then and then it's like, and then it goes from there. Then
so
it's like, and then you realise actually you're chatting and you're like, oh wow, we have like this, with, you know, the same interests, or we're googling the same things, and then and then I think it's just communication as well. I feel like whenever we're doing a job, there's like a starting point, and like you might send me some images, and then I'm like, yeah, I get it, because we're on the same page with a lot of things, so then I'll get it. But then I'll be like, but what about this? And then I'll go to my studio and I'll be like making wigs and culling them, and then I'll be FaceTiming and sending videos and be like, what do you think of this? And then you might go, oh yeah, I love that, but then why don't you throw this on it, or try this? And so I think it's communication. I think if you have that relationship, I think it's probably the most important thing,
Yeah,
to be honest.
breaks down that first barrier, because I think when you're
Yeah.
working with other people and working with other creatives, you kind of have to be sort of like empathetic to their process. You have to kind of step inside their shoes so that you can
Yeah.
actually kind of like work with them. And I think that there's sometimes clashes because people don't understand other people's processes.
I kind of want to get into your journey, Charles, because you are from East London, and now, like, with a brand that you have and going international, working in so many different places, how did you handle difficulties along the way? Because I know a lot of things change. One big example is COVID and how that could have affected your career and your fashion shows, for example. So how do you navigate through those difficulties?
Well, I mean, at the very beginning, I will say it was very chaotic. Like when I started, I really didn't have my head screwed onto my shoulders. Like I was quite, I mean, I say this a lot, I was quite all over the place, but actually I did have I was quite like, I was consistent in what I was doing. Like I knew I wanted to have my own label. When it started working, I was like, this is what I want to do. But I was also very much enjoying myself. Like I was partying a lot. I was kind of doing a lot of like crazy things. But and I didn't have that much money, and but I stuck to it and I really believed in it. And there was times where it was really, really difficult. Like I couldn't afford to eat. I wasn't able to know how I was going to pay some of my team members. But then I kind of put myself out there and I asked people for help, and I was very sort of like forthcoming with like, this is my situation. Like I don't come from money. I'm working 3 jobs. Like this is who I am. This is what I want to do. But I believe in what I want to do. And, I had some really great people help me out, like sponsor me. And that was only through putting myself out there. And I think sometimes you have to be a little bit shameless. I think a lot of people are very scared of like, kind of being authentic and sort of being honest about their own experience.
Yeah.
I stuck to my guns. I was very consistent. And so the business, when it started kind of coming together and kind of working in, like we got the sales in and then we got the production right and the deliveries, and then it kind of became this machine that was sort of moving and breathing. And when COVID came, at that point we were doing quite big shows. We were spending quite a lot of money on our shows. And we started to realize that, we won't be able to do this anymore. But then what we had was we had a very stable, realistic foundation of sales, and we had stores that were still going to buy into us. And obviously the world was sort of closing off in different areas, but then there was some places that still had their online stores and everything was working. So then me and my team also, we had such a good connection because we've built this kind of good working environment. Everyone's very agreeable. We are very authentic with the team. We also have distance as well. So we were small at the time. So we were able to be quite agile when COVID started to shut down. Obviously everybody worked from home and we were able to coast through, COVID. And then it was also a really great time to adopt different ways of expressing fashion. Fashion was always just one thing. It was like a show and it was the same people and it was like only for the upper echelon, and it was just like something I never really liked from a certain perspective. But then we were able to do films, we were able to do photo shoots
was,
and
like, the biggest thing, I think.
yeah, but then making like printed materials, like I did this amazing project with Tim Walker where we made this box that was like this big tapestry, and then we were thinking about how can Loverboy enter the home in a more permanent way that's not like in clothing, and how can you make other things. And even to the point now we made it last year because it was still COVID-y, but I've made a record, we've made an album with some friends of mine, because I was like, well, I want to start making products that are a bit more timeless that people can kind of come back to, that is not just like clothing.
If it's something that you really enjoy, I think you just can power through. Like, I think to be in the creative industry, I think it is really hard. And I think probably most people agree, if you're creative, you just don't have a choice, like, because you just love what you do.
If it's starting to feel painful or you're not enjoying it, you need to be like, well, what do I enjoy, and how can I use that to trick myself to then do it? Always kind of be reflective of where you are at every single step, because there is going to be times where it's not glamorous, it's going to be really, really hard, and you're going to be like, oh my god, why am I doing this? Why am I working 2 jobs? I hate this, but I wanted to do this. And just be very reflective, and also be grateful, because it's a good sort of exercise, because you're going to come up to imposter syndrome all of the time. Like I get it still to this day, like, get little kind of bits of it here and there. But I think, exercising mindfulness and being grateful, even if you're just thinking about it on the bus on the way home, like you don't need to write things down. It's not like an exercise. Like, it's just really important, because that internal dialogue and just kind of constantly just like it's okay, you know, you're going to do this. That's important because it is going to be really difficult.
Charles, you gave us 3 pieces of advice that you would like to share and that will help people out there, young people out there who's trying to get into the creative industry. So I'm going to start by your first one and you can explain what you meant by this. So your first one was learn a skill and own it. Why did you choose that?
I know that my skill, I can't sew or pattern cut for anything. I'm really bad at it. I really cannot make clothes at all. I always found it so difficult. I think it's my dyslexia. But what I'm really good at is I'm good at working with people, and I'm really good at explaining an idea and visually communicating something. And I'm just a nice person. I'm like good with people, but that's a skill.
100%.
And it's taken me a while to really actually hone in on that and be like, this is something that is actually that actually really helps a lot of situations out. You know, I can see both sides to an argument. I can see something. I can bring people together. It's always a nice environment when you work. I can guarantee that when you work with me, it's a good environment because that's a skill that I have. You know, so when you own that, that helps you with your confidence. And then, you know, when you go into like an imposter syndrome situation, if you know what your skill is, okay, this is my thing. I'm good at this thing.
When I first started, I would put myself in the positions that like of learning things that I didn't like, I'd not necessarily known. Like as soon as I started doing Fashion Week, I would always grab the girls that like had afro hair and needed braiding, always, and I'd grab someone who was good at it and say, show me what to do. Be putting yourself in them positions where if you're not 100% sure on the skills, that like, you know, I think you've always got to have the foundations and then build from there.
One of my best pieces of advice I was ever given is it was from a book called How to Steal Like an Artist. And it's like, if you like a designer's work, look at what they looked at and then research that. So I love Vivienne Westwood, like, you know, I love her so much. And I saw that she was obsessed with the Wallace collection in central London. So I went there and I like saw all of the kind of Baroque amazing paintings by Boucher and all of the amazing objects. And then I did a project on it myself, and it was really interesting to kind of delve into that world and look at her process.
But it's also like you're saying about like the imposter syndrome, but sometimes it's like almost gives you like a bit of a fire. Like I'm like, well, why shouldn't I be here? And why shouldn't I have an accent? Like, because you know, and like things that people pick up on, and you just think, well, you know what? Actually, like, you know, sometimes I'll be on a shoot and they'll be like, oh, how long have you been in London? I'm like, 10 years. And like, oh, you still got your accent? And I'm like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I? Like, and I'm here and I'm loud, and it is what it is. So it's always, sometimes there is moments where it will make you feel like, oh God, maybe, but then sometimes it makes me think a bit like, no, I should be here and I should say what I've got to say and fight for it almost. So it's like, it can go two ways as well. So I think it's also owning yourself and what, you know, not trying to sort of fit into the room that you're in, just being yourself, and then that's the best way to be, I think.
No, 100%. I love that so much. So your second piece of advice was be an agreeable person. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of touched on it earlier, but I think generally it's like it's just being like nice.
Yeah.
Like, you know, everybody
Just be nice.
and just being really, you know, I think being open to the right people about certain maybe just your own sensibility. I think that like creative people are sometimes a bit insular. There's sometimes they can get a bit stressy, and everyone has a different kind of way of being. Like I think through teaching for a long time and seeing lots of different students, you kind of meet different types of people. But I think that just having like the basic skills of being polite, turning up on time. I mean, agreeable comes into a lot of different things. It's like, you know, being a consistent person when you're on the job, like turning up, being polite, like these very, very basic things are what people are, you know, remember.
For me as well, it was a lot of like I just naturally, I feel like my whole journey I've just said yes to things, but it's because I've wanted to do them. Whereas I think a lot of people will say yes, but they'll be like, but how much am I getting paid? Or but what's this, and where have I got to be, and blah blah blah. But I'm like, if it's something I want to do anyway, and then, you know, you find out your rate and whatever along the way, that's great. But if it's something I want to do, then I want to do it. So I think it's agreeable for me is also like, is if you want to do it, then do it.
Yeah, I've always kind of got the best things in my job through just actually putting myself out there and messaging someone. Like I messaged Prada the other day that they've got one contact there who I sometimes speak to about getting a show, and I was like, I need a mentor. I don't actually have a mentor. I want to ask Raf Simons or Mucha Prada to be a mentor. And I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to be really polite, and I'm going to send this email to this person that I have, and I'm like, look, I know this is a bit of a long shot, but I'm about to do a show in Milan in January, and I would love to speak to somebody who's quite high up there and to just ask for a little bit of advice. And the guy came back and he was like, well, let me see what I can do.
basic thing, being nice and
Yeah.
being respectful
Yeah.
of people. And the third and final one was try and keep as many working relationships transactional.
Yes. So this is kind of quite specific because of just a few things that I've experienced in running a business. So when I started, it was a club night and it was a group of friends and we were all kind of all doing this together, and it was like we were kind of making work, and there was a lot of kind of blurred lines between like roles and responsibilities, but then it was like my name at the top, and then there was some people that were credited and then some people wouldn't, naturally because of how people would write things, and then it all kind of became, I definitely found myself in a few kind of like tricky situations. Just having something written down, kind of stating that this is what you're doing for me, this is what I'm doing for you. There's no money being exchanged, but there's maybe an exchange of like, okay, I'm going to help you with a favor. If your mum's doing something for you, okay, I'll make sure I wash the car. I don't know, this is a bit random, but I think it's so important to have that boundary, because if you can't pay with money, let's figure out something that you can do something with. Always have something in contract, always have something written down. Okay, if I'm doing this for nothing, then this means that this will happen later. Because even if someone's just like, oh, no, it's fine. As soon as you put something in place, you really get the true colours of somebody through it. So I just think with anything, even if it's the smallest job, have it written down, have proof of it, do it in an email.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm being a bit pedantic, but I'm doing this. Can I do, we're on texting right now. Can I have this in an email? Do you mind if we get a little bit grown up for a second? It just protects you.
Thank you so much for Charles and Claire for joining me today. We had an amazing conversation, and you can catch it on our IGTV Live. Again, a huge round of applause for Charles and Claire.